So I'm working on a couple other videos that are a bit more complex to edit, and I don't have a lot of time because I am constantly breastfeeding, it feels like. So today I wanted to do a shorter, simple video just answering some of your questions. So these are questions that I've received many times, worded in many different ways, so I just pulled some of the recent ones, but all of these are questions that I get a lot. Typically I do answer these like directly to people, but I feel like, you know, these are just so common that maybe if you stumble by this video, this might be helpful to you. Granted, this is just my perspective and my opinion. I think other people will have different answers to these questions about paganism and witchcraft, but this is my take on it, so I hope that it's helpful to you. And if you have any further questions or want me to expand on any of these, just go ahead and leave a comment below and I will probably get back to you within a few days. So with that, let's go through a few of the most common questions that I get about paganism and witchcraft. All right, Ree Nolly asked, I say aloud loosely, I know everyone can be different, but when starting deity work, is it looked down upon to start worshipping two deities at once? My answer to this is no. And the reason for this is that in the ancient world, people just had many deities. Like, they grew up learning about them, they grew up going to multiple temples, they grew up doing multiple rituals or festivals. So from a very young age, from childhood, people were interacting with, on some level, a whole pantheon. So I think that if you decide to work with a pantheon that is sort of contained, like you just want to work with Norse deities or you just want to work with Greek deities, you might have an easier time working with multiple deities at once. If you're choosing to mix deities, it might be a bit more complicated, just because there's going to be some things that might be sacred in one path but might be taboo in another, or ways of worship that would work in one path but don't work in another. So with that in mind, you probably want to just do your research. Maybe have different spaces for different deities if they're from different pantheons or if they don't get along in their mythology. Just do your research on what that looked like in the ancient world and the location that that path comes from or that deity comes from, and try to mimic as best you can that experience, really. That's a very Reconstructionist point of view. I'm a bit of a loose Reconstructionist. Like, I don't believe like in hard lines on this. If you're not familiar with Reconstructionists, basically that's a way of doing paganism where you try to literally reconstruct what existed in the ancient world. So I'm more of the opinion that, you know, people in the ancient world weren't perfect. They were just as human as you and I, and they probably made up things as they went along and found out what worked and what sticked. And we can draw on that wisdom, but we don't have to be bound by it. That's kind of my opinion there. So again, other pagans might have a different point of view on this, but that's mine. So no, I don't think you need to worry about it. Just, you know, be smart. Maybe don't put them on the same altar, or, you know, say hello to them both at the same time, or ask them to enter your space or a sacred space at the same time if they aren't complementary deities. For example, Persephone and Demeter, you're probably fine working with side by side or even on the same altar. Maybe not so much like Zeus and Thor. Amethyst Angel asked, how do we talk to them once we pick? So this is a video I did about how to sort of identify a deity that might work for you. So how do you talk to them once you identify that deity? I think it really depends on where that deity comes from. Again, this is a very Reconstructionist point of view, but in some paths it works to just say a chant or or just pray, or to come up with a song that might work. Other paths are a bit more demanding as far as ritual work and communication with deities and like what offerings are required even to start a conversation, like Kemetic paths are like this. But that doesn't mean you have to abide by those rules. Again, I'm more of a Reconstructionist-ish, soft Reconstructionist. Some people are just very modern with their paganism, and they interact with their deity the way that they grew up interacting with the god of their family background. So if you grew up Christian and you grew up praying every meal or praying before bed, a lot of people just replace the god they're talking to with their new pagan god and find that really works for them. So I would encourage you to explore what to you feels like communication with God. Do you feel like you are in connection with the divine of the universe when you are on a hike out in nature, when you're in meditation? Do you feel that way when you are, you know, in like this ecstasy of music and song? Or do you feel that way when you're deep in ritual work? And I think that the way that you personally feel that you can talk to God or goddess might point you to a path that works for you, or might point you to a pantheon that works for you. So if you're very into ritual magic and ritual workings, then maybe you need to follow like Belema, or maybe you need to explore Kemetic paganism, I don't know. But you come first. This is your spirituality, this is your path, this is your development, this is your fulfillment as a soul, right, in a body. So I would go with what works for you, what feels right, and start there. So for me, I do best when I am communicating with God or goddess through being outside in nature, when I am doing some sort of work with my hands. I do a lot of artwork, and that's not so much because I think I'm an artist as it is like that's how I connect a lot of the time with goddess, is I like to just be creative and get into a flow, and I feel like I'm connecting with that creative flow that fuels the universe, you know? So it's a little bit hippy-dippy to put it that way. That's how I connect, that's how I communicate and speak, and sometimes I just speak out loud, and I find that really helpful, especially when I'm stressed or I'm nervous. I have a new baby right now, and sometimes when her breathing changes or she chokes a little bit or I just feel worried because she's crying and she's stressed, sometimes I will just talk to Isis as if she was in the room, as if she was like my mother teaching me how to be a mother. I would just talk to her, and that's really helpful too. And so I don't have to do any big ritual with that, it just comes naturally, and I find a lot of comfort in that, and I think that's normal. Doot asks, so what are some ways that we can protect ourselves when we are connecting with deities? I want to start working with one, but I don't want to accidentally bring in an unwanted spirit into the house that isn't the deity I'm connecting with. I think this is more likely to happen if you are mixing any kind of witchcraft with your pagan path. It's very possible that you might let in something that you don't want into your home or your sacred space. But personally, I wouldn't think about it too much or worry about it too much. So again, this is just from my perspective. This is purely anecdotal. I think a lot of other witches or pagans are going to have a different experience or a different answer to this. So, you know, take what I have to say with a grain of salt. But for me, I think that when you are preoccupied with what you are afraid could come or could happen, it's more likely to attract it to you. I think a huge part of when you're ready to start evoking or invoking different entities is about when you feel confident that you have control of your mind and control of your speech to only bring in what it is that you want to bring in the first place, right? So you can be polytheist and worship gods without, you know, trying to bring them into your space. You can just have an altar, you can just send out prayers, and if they want to communicate back to you, they will. They will find a way to do that. They will connect with you when they need to. They might come to you in dreams. They might send you signs. You might have psychic experiences. So if you are just looking to have like a very polytheist approach to this, you don't need to worry about this, I don't think. Just go ahead and make your altar, send out your good vibes, send out your prayers and your offerings, you'll be fine. If you are trying to do any sort of casting of circles, evoking or invoking of entities, which there is a difference, then you're gonna have a bit more of a tricky time. And I think that that doesn't necessarily mean you can't be a beginner and do that. I think you can. I think it's all about how much power do you have over your own mind, your own speech, and your own energy. If you are confident that you can effectively ward your home, effectively ward your space, if you are confident that you can stop your mind from going places you don't want it to go, you're probably going to be fine. If you're someone who suffers from intrusive thoughts, that can be a bit more difficult. If you're someone who has anxiety, it can be a bit more difficult. So I would just be patient with yourself and not force yourself to do any of that yet. Do that when you're ready. It's not a requirement to have a relationship with a deity to be inviting them into your space like that. Just one woman's opinion. Pluto asked, is there a limit to how many patrons or matrons and spirit guides you can have? Because I had many deities reaching out to me so far, and I don't know who they are to me either. I think this is a really common question. I get this question in a lot of different kind of formats, but I think that in general, the answer is no. If you look at the list of entities in the Greek pantheon, like everything from gods to demigods to nymphs and heroes, like the mythology is crazy. And I think that, yeah, the average person probably didn't like worship all of them, but there were people in ancient Greece who were responsible for being keepers of that knowledge and were responsible for, you know, having a depth of knowledge about how those figures interacted with each other, what they knew about each other. I think that's why it's interesting to read things like Homer's Odyssey, right? Is you get to see how somebody who wasn't necessarily a priest of any of these gods understood them and incorporated them into a story. So no, I don't think that you can have too many. I think that don't overload yourself. Like, you can respect and like a lot of deities or entities or spirits without having to directly work with them, right? And like, I worship Isis. Like, she is my main squeeze, but I actively revere a lot of other deities in that pantheon without saying that I work with them closely. For a while, like there were some that I worked with for maybe 6 months or a year or something like that, or even just a couple lunar cycles and felt like a connection to, and we interacted. Hathor is a good example of that, but it wasn't a long-term relationship. So I think that if there are a lot of gods that you like or are interested in, or a lot of spirits, like go ahead and make an offering. Go ahead and do like one ritual with them, or one little festival in your home, or have a feast and offer it to them. Like that's totally fine. Or you can just make little shrines. You don't have to feel like you need to devote yourself to the extent that monotheism preaches to every deity that you work with. Do you know what I mean? I feel like we're really conditioned from monotheism, from like Christianity and Islam and Judaism, that everything goes to that one God that you are supposed to be eternally and fully devoted to. Paganism doesn't really work that way. You are allowed to like divide up your time and have different days be sacred to different beings and different times of day even, or different weather events or natural events or life events that you could give grace or give thanks to those gods. Like, I just gave birth, right? So Mut is kind of on my mind, but I don't work with her, I don't worship her, but I did say thank you for the safe birth that I was able to provide for my daughter. You'll feel what's right and what your good sweet spot is for how much of your energy and love you are able to give out. That maybe you have a limit of like 2 or 3, maybe you have a limit of 25, maybe you have a limit of there is no limit. I don't know. Okay, so Erica asked, I see a lot of people put candles on their altars, but I know a lot of apartments and dorms don't allow them. Any tips or alternatives, or other ways to channel energy for deities? So I guess this kind of depends on how do you think about the element of fire. I think in like modern popular witchcraft, yes, fire does represent spirit. It does represent sort of a channeling of your energy at a lot of the time. I don't really work with fire that way. For me, fire is more representative of the entity that I have invited into my space, or the entity that I have created an altar for. That flame usually represents them for me, and it's a way to focus my energy on feeling like they're there and feeling like they're present. So with that in mind, like yes, fire does have its own power, but it's also a bit more symbolic, right? It's more for the benefit of my mind. So if you can't have fire in your apartment or your dorm, you can always get like little battery LED light or LED candles, I think, that kind of mimic the look of a flame. That's totally fine, do that. Basically, I would go ahead and set aside some time to explore what fire means to you as the element and what it means on your shrine or on your practice, and list other things that represent those same attributes. So if fire to you is spirit, or fire to you is passion or creativity, what other things do you associate with those? And you can kind of switch out the flame with those symbols. So for example, for me, the flame represents the presence of a deity, and that's where I would also put in things like icons or statuettes, right? Those to me would be the presence of a deity as well. But if a flame for you is more about your energy that you're putting out, and it's a way for you to sort of channel yourself, you might need something different. So if you really are looking for an alternative to candles, just go ahead and use LED candles, it's fine. Otherwise, I would explore what exactly is a flame to you and go from there. All right, Riley Smith asked, I'm a beginner witch. Can I work with deities? The answer is yes, you can. It's a total lie, in my opinion, that like beginners can't work with deities. Like, that's weird. There is some truth, however, to like, if you're a beginner, you probably shouldn't be invoking or evoking any entities, including deities. You probably shouldn't be doing like too complex of ritual magic, because you need to get your foundations. But like, if you're really devoted to your studies, like you might master it pretty quickly, and like in a matter of, a couple months, you're ready to do those things. I don't know, I can't read your mind. I think most people it takes a lot longer. The year and a day is very popular. I know that in some Wiccan covens, I believe, you are kind of given the opportunity over the course of your year and a day in the coven studying to explore different deities, and then when you're fully initiated, I think, is when the goddess that like is matched to you, or that you've connected with or bonded with, kind of becomes your patron, I think. I'm purely pulling this from like a book I read once. I don't know if this is true for like all covens, or if that was true for like the coven that the woman was writing about that she was part of. Anyway, so the answer is yes, you can. Go for it. Cyberspace asked, I can't wait for the progression. Thank you about my garden. Do you mind sharing how you found a pagan partner? I can't seem to find where the pagan men are, only the atheist and agnostic. I would love a how we met video. On the how we met video, yes, my husband and I do want to do one of those. He actually really wants to participate in more of these videos and like hang out. We're both home, but if I'm making a video, he's watching the baby and vice versa. Like if he's doing something, then I'm watching the baby. So it's a little bit complicated, but we will try to do that sometime. Advice on how to meet pagan partners. I have no idea. So my husband and I were introduced to each other through mutual friends who were like, okay, you won't stop talking about astrology and like metaphysics. I know somebody else who's doing the same thing. You guys should meet. And we went out for dinner and the rest is history, right? However, I do think that there is a lot of hunger among people who identify as atheist and agnostic for a good religion. So I think that if you have met somebody that you really like who's not already like super devoted to a specific god or religion, like they're not already like, you know, super Christian or something, feel free to, you know, introduce them to the theology that you follow or show them the array of things that you can find under the pagan umbrella and see if something attracts them. There are places online that you can find. I know that the Pagan subreddit has, so r/pagan, they have a subreddit specifically for dating. So I would just go there and then search dating or something, and then I think it'll come up. I don't remember what the subreddit's called. Otherwise, I would really encourage you to use social media, follow the hashtags that you are into, I guess, and stalk people's profiles, hit up a conversation with somebody, and it might start long distance, but you know, you can make it work. My husband's from Atlanta, I'm from Seattle. We're all right. I don't know, dating is hard anyway. It makes it a lot harder when you're trying to find somebody who shares your faith, and it's like, ugh. Especially not a very popular one. Kind of sucks. I guess another option would be to like go to more pagan events, you know, go to, if you have a temple in your area, already like pan-pagan organization, conferences, covens, outdoor ritual events, like those do happen. People do host those if you live in more like populated area. Go to those and try to make some friends, and friends of friends are it's gonna spark. And don't feel like when you go to those events that if you don't see anybody that you're attracted to, that they don't exist, because we all know that people who are part of those things versus people who actually show up to those events, very big discrepancy in numbers, right? Like I'm part of like 4 or 5 different organizations, but I go to like 1 or 2 events a year. So think about all the people who like know people who are there. They can introduce you to people who you might not see. Does that make sense? What I'm thinking of is the local like pagan temple in my area. Every time I go, it's like mostly people who are in their 50s and 60s, but they all have kids who are pagan who just like don't go very often, that are more my age and stuff. So, you know, they're out there. Just chat people up. Let people know you're looking. Caleb asks, I'm feeling drawn to Eros. What should I do about it? I'm not going to answer this about Eros because I don't really know much about Eros, but I can answer this for like gods in general. So you are feeling drawn to a god of some kind. Ooh, fun, right? What should you do about it? Whatever you want. Whatever you want. For example, I have lately been feeling drawn to Diana, so I'm going to be making a follow-up video to my finding a new god or goddess thing very soon. That's one of the ones I'm editing right now. One of the ones that I have suddenly found myself interested in after thinking I never would be was Diana. So what did I do? I obviously like devoured the Wikipedia page. I went online and read some free resources that I could find. I made some artwork for her, like a collage. I'm planning on doing a painting later this month of her. I'm going to be doing like a small offering and like a very small icon. So if you're feeling drawn to a deity, I recommend that you just learn about them, read about them as much as you can, maybe find some other pagans that worship them actively now and blog about it or post about it, read what their experiences are or watch their videos, get a taste for it, and then just go introduce yourself. Just follow your gut instinct, and it's okay if you feel nervous, it's okay if you feel like you're second-guessing yourself and doubting every move. That's totally normal. Don't worry about it. Just say hello, and that's going to be the hardest part. Like once you've introduced yourself to these gods, or once you get to know them, it'll get easier every time. First cut is the deepest, baby, I know. Paige asked, how do I know if Athena is calling to me? This is another one where I can't really speak for Athena, but I can speak for like, how do I know if X deity is calling to me? I think when people first decide that they want to be pagan or they want to find a god or goddess to work with, they turn on their brains in ways that it hasn't been turned on before, and everything feels like a sign. Like the crows that have been in your yard for years suddenly feel like they are looking at you and they're communicating something. Like it's just very easy to interpret everything around you as a sign because our brains are hardwired to see patterns, right? That doesn't mean those things aren't signs. I think that whatever you want to be a sign can be a sign. So if suddenly the crows in your yard feel like a sign, it's probably because the entity that, rules over them or communicates through them, whether that be the Morrigan or Odin, is, someone that you would connect with or click with. And maybe you should go ahead and just pursue that. It is true that gods do reach out to us sometimes, but I don't think it's as common as we want it to be. I think everybody wants like a fantastic origin story, and it doesn't mean you won't have one. I think once you've been pagan for a while, or you've worked with some gods, or you've introduced yourself, you're more likely to actually have a god like come after you. I think that that's really more common that way once you're more fluent, I guess, in spiritual language. But that doesn't mean it won't happen when you're new. I think it does pretty often. People have great stories about it. It's really cool. So how do you know if the deity in question is calling to you? You don't. But if you suspect that they are, if you have a feeling that they are, or you want them to call to you, just pursue it. If you want a deity to be calling to you and you can't tell if they are, say something back. Just say something back. Ask for a sign. Ask for a very specific kind of sign, but make sure you do it with an offering. Do it with gratitude. Do it with love. Do it with like a completely open heart and an open mind, and you might really be surprised. If you have like undeniable signs around you, that's a whole different story and maybe a different conversation for a different video, because I think that that's a bit more complex and requires more of a scholarly conversation on the nature of the spirit world living alongside ours and how they can manipulate our world to interact with us. Alright, Mary from the Barricade asked, my thing with deities is that I'm drawn to them, but they'll have dangerous flaws like the Greeks. I don't want to work with a god who has ill intent and only thrive to receive worship, but I still keep being drawn to them. P.S. They say, I'm not shitting on people who follow deities. I just feel spiritually myself that I don't want to connect with a god or goddess that I feel has done more harm than good. So we did have a quick conversation about this in the comments, but I wanted to share this here because I totally relate. Yeah, the gods are really flawed, or sometimes they come across as like arrogant or rude, or they just have flaws that like our current culture or wherever we come from doesn't like. Like certain personality traits in some cultures are valued and others they're not. Like I lived in Japan for a few years, and being like a loud, boisterous individual is not a good idea over there, whereas in America that's rewarded as behavior. So yeah, when we see gods who have certain traits of their personalities or certain things that they've done in their mythologies, we could be really turned off. And then there are things that are like just objectively bad, like violent. Yeah, it's not comfortable, it's not pretty. However, I think that, in the same way that the natural world is fairly neutral, so are the gods and so are people, right? Like our moral compasses are really determined by our culture and our upbringing. The gods have their own moral compass that's not going to represent ours, in the same way that nature has her moral compass and her own corrective attitudes. Like if there's a volcanic eruption that devastates an entire ecosystem, do we think of that as Mother Nature doing evil, or do we think of that as Mother Nature just being? Like when humans do that, when we cause environmental devastation, we consider it bad. But when nature does it to herself, we're pretty accepting of that. We have a good understanding of that. So I think what you need to do if you're struggling with the morality of the gods is remind yourself that at the end of the day, they are either represented in nature or they are part of nature, depending on how you believe in them. That's essentially what they're tied to, right? And we can't put our own human hearts on their behavior. It doesn't mean we can't be uncomfortable by it. It doesn't mean we can't ask questions. Like if you worship Hades, you could totally open up a conversation with Hades and say, hey, why did you do that to Persephone? Like you're totally in your wheelhouse to do that. Go for it. It's okay. So yeah, I don't know, it's kind of a short answer to that one, but it's more of a personal meditation that all of us have to go through, right? It's not like there's one sentence to fix. All right. Anam McCartney asked, I'm so excited to start this journey. Lately, I've been feeling drawn to Hades, Hecate, and Aphrodite, but I've been feeling a bit confused because Athena embodies many qualities I want to look into, but I don't feel particularly drawn to her. This was such an interesting question to me because I can completely relate to this. So if you watched my Connecting with Deities video from a few years ago, I suggested that a good way to find a god or goddess is to like list out things that you feel connected to or that you're interested in, and then sort of cross-reference that with the gods, right? That's honestly my main method. I still do that today. But there's sometimes you come across, though, a god or goddess that literally checks off everything on your list, but you just feel no connection to them. So for me, Hathor is one of those. Asherah is another one. Everything that they have associated with them is exactly what I'm looking for in a deity relationship, and it's like, what the hell? I really want to feel connected spiritually to this being because I feel like it's what I want, but it's not working. But like Tiana learned in Princess and the Frog, what you want is not necessarily what you need. So for me, a lot of goddesses that I end up feeling really connected to are goddesses of like fate, but I don't personally feel interested in those concepts at all. And so it's weird to me when they continuously show up in my dreams or in my visions or in my journalings or in my life as entities, and I have to do something about that connection, right? And I do. I build relationships and I find, oh, wow, this actually teaches me a lot more than what I thought. And so I think part of that is that sometimes when we have like a list of interests, we already know a lot of that shit, right? We don't actually need a deity to teach us any of those things. Like, we're taking care of it ourselves. My connection with trees, for instance, I don't necessarily need a goddess who resides in trees to teach me anything about tree wisdom, because I'm doing that on my own. I'm full speed ahead. Maybe what I really do need is a goddess who can teach me things about fate and the afterlife and death, because I don't personally study those and I need to be doing that. So yeah, I don't know, don't worry about it. Just whatever you're connected to, go for it. If there's a god that you feel like you should be connected to, go ahead and do what I said earlier. You know, make an offering, introduce yourself, see what happens. You might be able to grow a relationship from very little, and that's honestly probably going to be really rewarding too. I'm doing that with Asherah right now, and I'll talk about that in a future video very soon, hopefully. Bones They Them asked, do I have to practice witchcraft to work with deities? No, you do not. Polytheism is its own thing. Like, you can work with gods and you can worship gods as a religious practice. If you want to incorporate witchcraft, which is very common, you can do that. If you don't. Witchcraft essentially is like a practice, whereas paganism, like the religious side, is a spiritual experience. So you do not have to overlap them if you don't want to. Not that witchcraft can't be spiritual. It can be, but it can also be secular. So, you know, do as thou wilt. Okay, Phoenix asked, how can I try to set up an altar even though I'm closeted? If you're trying to set up an altar and you need to hide it from whoever you live with or people who might come into your home, an easy way to do that is to have like a pack-upable one or like a hidden one. Like, have a little box or a little bag where all your tools are in there, and then when you're ready to do what you want to do, you can just pop it all out, put it all together, and then collapse it back down when you're done. These could be mini altars, these could be like a whole suitcase full of shit that you keep under your bed. Like, as you are able to do your thing, do your thing. Other people I know have also done things like keeping it in closets, like literal closets or drawers. If you have a nice cabinet or something, you could do that. But don't feel like you need to have a permanent altar space if you're not in a living situation where that is safe or a good idea for you. I do not think that there's a single god or goddess or spiritual entity that would demand that you put yourself in emotional, mental, or social or familial danger by having a permanent altar. It's not a requirement. I do not have a permanent altar right now, and I've been pagan for years. I simply don't have one because I don't have the space. So I get all my stuff out when I can, and then I put it all back in a box and slide it under the couch when I'm not using my stuff. So don't worry about it. Just go ahead and pack it up, hide it. Okay, Sabbatha asked, can I work with a deity I wish? Like, can I choose one? Some people are saying, don't choose a deity, deity chooses you. Some are saying you can choose, but it's difficult for me because different occultists are having different opinions. Yes, they do have different opinions. So again, this is just a video of my opinions. My opinion is, yes, deities choose you sometimes, and yes, sometimes you choose the deity. Don't worry about it. If you're choosing to join a specific coven or you're joining a specific tradition, yes, follow their rules, follow their ways. There's a reason for them within the context of that tradition. But there is no hard rule in life, right? Like, you make your own rules if you're doing this on your own. I think that those rules have a place when there's a purpose for them in a longer path that's been written out, and you can do that. But if you're not doing that, if you're creating your own way, just go with your gut. If you want to choose a deity, choose a deity. If you feel like you need to wait for a sign for a certain one, do that. There's a reason you feel that way, so embrace that. Okay, and that was quite a few questions. I think I recorded all of those answers. If you'd like me to expand on any of these, or you have additional questions, feel free to leave them here in the comments or throughout my other videos. I do read them. I try to answer as many as I can, but some of them are honestly like kind of complex, and I struggle to find the words in, like, you know, what paragraph on YouTube, right? I want to have a conversation. It's shitty. If you would like me to do another video like this in the future, let me know. And of course the caveat here is that I am just one person. Nothing I say should be taken as like the word of the gods. And there's other perspectives out there, so keep exploring those questions if my answer did not satisfy you and didn't feel right. I'm sure that there's somebody who has worded it in a way that makes sense for you and what you need. Anyway, with that, I hope you're having a very lovely week, and we'll talk soon. Bye.